We'll go ahead and start. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Portneuf Resource Council and the League of Women Voters of Pocatello to Our Energy Future. We are sponsored by the League of Women Voters, and they have taken a serious position on climate change. They believe that it is a serious threat to our nation and our planet, and that there are many ways that we can go about protecting our public health and the global ecosystem. League supports creating goals and policies using the best available climate science in order to create a stable climate system. So we have had a number of our leaders recently make statements about climate change, and that's how I'd like to introduce what we're going to be doing today. Mr. Mike Simpson, our representative, said, "I actually do believe in climate change. I do believe it's happening. There are changes in the climate." And he's definitely thinking about how we might plan for the future, our energy future. And he's been asking himself, this was a quote from the Idaho Statesman just a few days ago, is it time for a Northwest Power Planning Act 2.0? So revisiting where we are with our energy plans on a state level. So either we can do it or it will be done for us, so we prefer to choose our own futures, make plans. Idaho Power, most of you maybe have heard what Idaho Power Corporation did recently. They made a 100% commitment, carbon-free commitment commitment to 100% from carbon-free sources by 2045. Governor Brad Little in January made a number of different statements. Climate is changing, there's no question about it. We've got to figure out how we're going to cope with it, and we've got to slow it down. He believes it's going to be a big job, but he's optimistic we can do something. And then our Mayor Blad's proclamation, which you can read over here. It's actually, this is the 9th one he's done. He's given the same proclamation for 9 years. And in it, you can see he says, yes, human activities are causing climate change. We have the knowledge and technology that we need to reduce our carbon footprint. And at the last sentence, he talks about taking action, and that's what we're doing tonight. So we are very pleased to have our Mayor Blad's support on our activities. So what we are doing tonight is in our strategies to lower municipal carbon footprint. We will be talking about and exploring different ways that the cities of Pocatello and Chubbuck, what we can do to reduce our greenhouse gases, or go 100% renewable, or have a net zero goal of some sort. We want to define a vision for our energy future. So we'll look at why cities are doing this across the nation and begin the conversation. What steps do we need to take? And where can we go? And that begins with creating a goal, and that's the conversation we're going to be having tonight. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Stevens, who will be our moderator tonight. And go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Linda. So first of all, our program this evening is being taped by Community Access Television. So I want to give them a big thank you. It means we'll have a record of this, and people who aren't able to attend tonight will also be able to know what's going on. I also want to do a big shout out to League of Women Voters, and I'm off script, so I hope my bosses don't get me in trouble for this. But as a kid, my mom was a member of the League of Women Voters. She was born just a year or two after women got the vote, so League of Women Voters was a pretty big deal to her. And, you know, they really, as I was thinking about them tonight, they really presaged the future because they have always been nonpartisan, issue-based, and grassroots. And if that doesn't describe what is going on today in politics, I don't know what does. So I think we've finally grown in to the history that the League of Women Voters and the legacy that they have given us. So I want to give you a little information about the program flow and some of the nuts and bolts tonight. The program order is that first we'll hear from our presenters, and there will be time for questions at the end. So we're not going to take questions during the presentations. Please hold your applause until the end. I know you want to thank these terrific people, and I appreciate that, but we are trying to respect everybody's precious time and move the program ahead as efficiently as we can. Each presenter has a finite amount of time, and our timekeepers will give you time updates. And where are our timekeepers going to be sitting? Right there. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Once your time has expired, if you're still talking, I will, in the most gracious way imaginable, cut you off. Do it. If you have questions, I believe there are cards available. Pam, how does that? Okay, were they on the chairs?
We passed them out.
Okay, perfect. So as you think of questions throughout the presentation, if you would just write them down and then hold them up, and monitors will collect them and take them over to the question table. In some cases, we will perhaps combine similar questions and we'll sort them so that we don't have a lot of duplicates, just in the interest of getting as much information and answering as many different questions as we can. Our focus tonight is why cities are looking, and cities and towns and states, but particularly in this case, Pocatello, why cities are looking at reducing their reliance on carbon-emitting fuels and ways that they can transition smoothly to a cost-effective clean energy plan. So it's critical to understand that we're here focused on clean energy, but we're also very appreciative of the fact that cities need smooth transitions and they need cost-effective plans. Our presenters this evening are a distinguished crew. First, we have Julie Raymond. Julie will be introducing our topic. She is a doctoral candidate in political science at ISU with a focus on climate change and environmental policy. I wish they'd had that major when I was in graduate school. She has interned with several climate and environmental organizations and has actually attended several world climate conferences. Steve Burgos is our keynote speaker. Steve is the Boise Public Works Director. He was instrumental in Boise adopting their 100% renewable energy goals. He was an environmental consultant and vice president for Brown and Caldwell Environmental Engineers and Scientists. And he graduated just recently from Duke University with a degree in civil and environmental engineering. In fact, I believe we graduated at the same year. Kelly Cooper, who will be giving her presentation to us tonight on a Zoom call, is the AmeriCorps Sustainability Coordinator and Environmental Education Specialist for Moscow, Idaho. She holds degrees in environmental science and geology from Washington State University. Paul Campbell is chairman of Campbell Scientific, an internationally known instrumentation company in Logan, Utah. He currently serves on the Environmental Technology Trade Advisory Committee of the International Trade Administration in the Department of Commerce. So I had to read that because there was no way I was going to be able to remember that. His company has, by the way, hired a number of ISU graduates to do various types of electrical work for his company. And Ben Otto is the Energy Associate for the Idaho Conservation League. He serves on the boards of the Northwest Energy Coalition and the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. He holds a master's degree in environmental law from the Vermont Law School and a Juris Doctor degree from Lewis and Clark Law School. Now, unless I've forgotten something critical to your individual identities that you want to mention, I will turn it over to Julie to begin our presentations.
Good evening, everyone. Sustainable means enough of the planet's resources, processes, and fitness for life have been preserved to ensure the next generation can survive. Survival alone is a pretty low bar, since most of us would actually like our children to thrive, to exceed our own successes in every way. Together, we are the guardians and cultivators of tomorrow, organizing an inheritance of social, environmental, and physical resources drawn on to sustain life now and ensure, at a minimum, that future generations have life chances at least equal to our own. We are the architects of the future world. In the developed West, a sustainable future requires a process of redevelopment, where old technologies evolve or are abandoned in favor of cleaner, more efficient means of powering our world. We don't sell wagon wheels anymore for a reason, because we found better ways to travel and move materials. Today, we again seek new ways to accomplish tasks that we depend upon to recognize are becoming obsolete. You may be surprised to note that the most profound drivers of sustainable change are CEOs and city mayors. Collaborative mayors at local city scales are pioneering the path forward to low-carbon urban living. Each municipal entity faces unique challenges of scope of municipal services and technical capacity. But working together, they create a network to share best practices and support in problem solving for their communities. CEOs are looking for municipal partners that have a shared culture of sustainability, not just a few talking points. These companies take into account where their employees want to live, and they want places with clean water, clean air, and quality of life. Emission sources are largely the same in all cities. Inefficient heating and cooling, refrigeration, lighting systems and windows, roofs and walls with energy leaking spaces, outdoor lighting also wastes heat. Methane producing sources like solid waste, landfills, and agricultural industries. Methane, it's important to note, is 23 times stronger than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Traffic congestion is another issue, and water systems that leak or lose energy. Cities create competitive advantages by attracting innovation and being a place people want to call home. Policy changes in cities are relatively nimble to other scales, and direct accountability to the success or failure of actions makes cities the most powerful vector to model sustainable change. In Idaho, cities are experiencing economic impacts due to climate change. Idaho's $3.7 billion tourism industry employs more than 45,800 Idahoans and generates $475 million in local, state, and federal tax revenues. Idaho also has more recreational river miles than any other state. 18 recreational winter resorts, and 60% of the state is under federal government protection and available for public use. Idaho is unique, and a wide variety of wild spaces, high mountain peaks, expansive forests, and deep backcountry make Idaho the perfect place for work and life to balance. Idaho is a gem, and people will want to live here. Most of Idaho's technology, industry, transportation, and agriculture is located along the Snake River Plain, around our 4 largest cities. The U.S. Census reports that the state's population rose 20% between 2000 and 2010, and rose to over 1.6 million in 2015 from over 1.5 million. By 2020, the population is expected to reach over 1.8 million. In the next 20 years, the number of snow days below freezing could drop by weeks and months. That means that winter sports industry will be directly impacted. Bogus Basin area is building a water storage dam and putting in underground pipes to make artificial snow. Idaho Press reported in April that compared to 30 years ago, Bogus Basin has lost 3 weeks of sufficient snow for skiing per year, a loss of $1 million per week. The home of world-class fishing, Idaho has 4 species of trout that are expected to go extinct in the next 50 years. Salmon are already struggling and dying due to high water temperatures and overall lower river flows. Climate Impacts Group predicts that unabated temperatures will raise a total of 4 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. That is a lot. Since 2000, Idaho has experienced only 1 year with no drought conditions. 9 years since 2000, the U.S. Drought Monitor recorded 100% of the state experiencing severe drought conditions and up to 60% in extreme or exceptional drought conditions. Drought reduces reservoir levels, increases concentrations of natural and human pollutants, further stressing the environment. In mountain regions with forested areas subject to drought, we have seen the terrible devastation of residential wildfires in California. Pocatello has had very close calls with south of town and the Charlotte fire. Higher temperatures will increase burn areas in the west. If the temperature increases by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit, at least 2 to 3 times more area will burn in our area. The higher elevations, at least 6 times more area will burn. Today, the burn season is 2.5 months longer than it was in 1970, starting earlier and ending later. In 2018, wildfires cost the state of Idaho $17 million. The environment has boundaries. Together we are teasing at the boundary of Earth's safe operating space for humanity, which has remained stable for the last 10,000 years, allowing humanity to thrive. Earth's climate system has been demonstrably impacted by human activity since the Industrial Revolution, resulting in increasingly unpredictable swings in timing and intensity of weather systems, increasing temperatures, and the tandem climb of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, like methane and CO2. It is necessary for humanity to radically change the meaning of business as usual. In all of this, the key to reordering business as usual, and Idaho stands to gain substantially by planning for a sustainable future. Idaho has unique strengths that strongly position the state to lead sustainable energy solutions nationally and globally. Rare earth minerals are 17 different minerals used for high-tech products like cell phones, wind turbines, hybrid batteries in cars, and weaponry, just to name a few. And these deposits are located in the Lemhi Pass on the Idaho-Montana border and north of Salmon in the Diamond Creek area. These rare earth element alloys can be used to form strong permanent magnets that, once installed, can be used to power mechanical devices, among many other uses. Geothermal power also exists throughout the Snake River Plain. It is clean and sustainable. New geothermal plants are near zero CO2. Power plants can use the steam to generate electricity, and there is enough power in the state to heat every home, with hundreds in cost savings to the consumer. Savings for public and commercial buildings, and carbon emission reductions of over 50% for most systems. Sustainable energy solutions are billion-dollar industries, with state incentive programs to help reduce upfront risk and secure power purchase agreements. Taking clues from local municipal leaders, CEOs directly dependent upon local relationships to maintain their status quo sustainably, thinking about the future prospects of the next generation, and fitness for life in general, sustainability must become the keystone of our decision-making, innovation, and transition to a carbon-neutral world. In closing, I would like to paraphrase the thoughts of an academic mentor of mine, Dr. Shirley J. Fisk. She has said that at this time in human history, the meaning of our time is ethical and moral. How do we want the future to look, and what can we do with the knowledge that we have? Tonight's forum seeks to answer important questions about this transition to a sustainable world. Tonight we hope to answer the following questions. Why should Pocatello consider a commitment to renewable energy or reducing greenhouse gases or net zero buildings? How can a small city like Pocatello go about economically lowering our footprint? And are the economic advantages and are there other possibly hidden benefits? With that ambitious list of questions, I'd like to turn the mic over to our keynote speaker, Steve Burgos.
Great, thank you, Julie. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come out. And then the slide deck, you want me to come down there? So before we get started, I just wanted to, hearing about the League of Women Voters.
Steve, you have to be on the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
There, we can't hear you on the television.
The League of Women Voters, we just had a project that we funded at our Lander Street facility. And Lander Street is our oldest water renewal facility, and it was built in 1949. And it was built based on the League of Women Voters getting out with a campaign to pass a bond to fund the water renewal facility. So just an acknowledgement, way back in 1949, that's well before the Clean Water Act, the League of Women Voters sponsored the bond that got our first water renewal facility built. So a really cool action that was taken. We have this really neat poster that we've kept that we're going to post. We're doing a remodel right now. We're going to post it in our front lobby. So, Boise's transition to clean energy. Again, my name's Steve Burgos. I'm the City of Boise Public Works Director. I have a really cool job. Julie alluded to it, that cities really are on the forefront of what's happening both nationally and internationally, in part because we're staring it down, frankly. We're dealing with a lot of these changes on a day-to-day basis, month-to-month basis, and I'll talk about some of that here in a second. But before I do that, I want to maybe suggest something that we can all relate to, and that's kind of those, I refer to them as career arcs. And so I'm an engineer, so what kind of a presentation from an engineer wouldn't have an XY axis and a bar chart? Couldn't help myself. So what you see on the X-axis is time, and on the Y-axis is skill sets, career advancements. This is all very theoretical, but this is something that I've learned in my career, and I've had really the good fortune of having bosses who have told me these things, where I'm at a certain point in my career, I have certain skill sets, I've learned them, I've practiced them, and maybe I've gotten pretty good to the point where maybe I'm getting considered for a promotion. And then the next step is to say, okay, that means I'm flattening out on my career arc, and I'm going to need to develop some new skill sets in order to take on that next job, right? What got me here won't get me there. So if we think about how that works, it's generally as we go through our career, we learn new skill sets, we practice new skill sets, and we master new skill sets, and then we get the next job, and that's a do loop, right? We learn, we practice, and we master. And we talk a lot at the city about having a growth mindset, i.e. that we're always learning, we're always engaged, there's always new challenges that require new skill sets in order to address them, right? And so that's a kind of a professional look at how we have all kind of gone through our careers, these career arcs. And I would suggest to you that cities have arcs. We'll get into this in a second, but before that, Julie had mentioned that cities are really kind of determining what's the future we're going to create. And this is a little bit dramatic. You can think of these as the two furthest goalposts, but does anybody recognize the picture on the left? Of course, yeah, the Jetsons, right? So the Jetsons are kind of a utopia that was kind of sold as, the cartoon, everything's happy, the kids are happy, everything's nice and blue, and everything's healthy. And on the right, can anybody tell me what that picture is from? Anybody take a guess? Blade Runner, good. So Blade Runner is on the right, and that's kind of a dystopia. That's a future looking pretty bleak, frankly. And if you've ever seen some of the trailers for Blade Runner, it's really pretty alarming. It's black, it's raining, and there's flames kind of shooting out of random spots of this urban landscape. So what city will we create? And we can't be naive enough to think that we're going to get the Jetsons. There's going to be challenges that remain really difficult to solve. But I think we can all agree we don't want to create the picture on the right. And I like trivia, so I'm going to ask you, in which years were the Jetsons and Blade Runner set? Anybody want to take it? Let's start with the Jetsons. What year was it set? So it was built, in this, well, I'll give it away if I say that, but how far into the future was it set? Anybody want to guess?
It wasn't far.
It's actually pretty far. 2062 for the Jetsons, because it was 100 years ahead. In 1962 it was built. And Blade Runner is 2019. That's when it was set. So kind of alarming that that's what Ridley Scott had in mind for our future. But that's, I think, something that we're actively creating. So the city of Boise, and let me say that we're working on these issues, and our hope is that when we share this information, that it's helping other cities learn from our mistakes, frankly, and maybe there'll be some things we get right, and that we're just trying to share this information. So at the city, we talk a lot about 20 years out, if this is what we want to start to see, how do you backcast this way to start saying, okay, well, if that's what we want to see in 20 years, these are the types of things we have to start doing. And so with that, we started getting into what are our Boise arcs. And if you look at our population growth since 1970, it looks a little bit like that curve I showed you, right? We had some flat spots, we have some increases, we have another flat spot. And so since 1970, we've had this growth. And you've heard Ada County is the fastest growing county in the US. So things are changing quickly in our area. And while that also presents challenges, it also presents opportunities. And so what we're looking at here is what are the new skill sets that we're going to have to develop based on those arcs of our city's history. And I would argue that Boise is in a unique spot because we're big enough to have to deal with some of these issues, but the issues aren't so large that they're just kind of, you can't get your head around it. Like if I was in Los Angeles and needed to try to transition from the single occupancy vehicles, that's just even hard. That makes my head hurt thinking about how do you do that. But I think in Boise, we're at an interesting point in our city's history where we can actually do things, learn from those cities about what not to do, but the problems are big enough that they do require action. So we teamed with the University of Idaho, Dr. John Abatsoglu. He helped us develop a Boise climate adaptation assessment. And the point of this was to say, specifically in Boise, what are the climate impacts that we think we're going to be facing? And you see the list here, and a lot of these are not breaking news, right? Drought frequency, we're going to have increased flooding danger. And some of those might seem kind of like, well, that doesn't match up. How can you have increased flooding danger, but yet higher drought frequency? And so that's all related to when the snow melt comes off the mountains. It's going to come off sooner, and we're a highly managed system in Boise. If the irrigators aren't taking the water's got to go somewhere. And so the concern is that we're going to be sending a lot of flood flows through the system, but then come July, August, when we haven't had rain for 2 months, that water we could have used probably just went through the system. And so we'll probably see more drought frequency. So some of these are kind of hard to connect. But from this, we started to say, okay, well, what are the actions we can take to start to get at climate change? And so we did a greenhouse gas inventory in 2015. We're going to re-up this here. It's going to come up on 5 years. And what that told us was we had a breakout of about 2/3 of our carbon footprint was related to energy, and another third was related to just transportation, and that's just vehicles on the road. And so kind of what Julie was alluding to earlier, all cities this breakout is not unique to Boise. It's a pretty similar pie chart for most cities. It may not be 2/3, 1/3, but maybe it's half-half, but they're similar to energy and transportation are the primary sources. So when we started talking about that 2/3 piece of community energy, and I'll describe what that is in a second, that's where we started saying, okay, if we're going to start getting after our carbon footprint, one of the first steps and the biggest chunk we can get at is the community energy piece. What is it that we need to do? How do we actually do that? And out of that came the project called Boise's Energy Future, where we started studying, okay, how do we get at the 2/3 of our carbon footprint? And then I'll get into the energy piece in detail, but there's other larger issues we're dealing with. And so generally on climate adaptation at the city, these are some of the categories we're working in. I won't get into the details of these. Obviously, I'm going to focus in on the energy front, but there's a lot of moving parts right now across the city. I could have urban planning on here. Density is a very sustainable approach to urban planning. We're really pushing on density downtown, density in development. There could be any number of other items on the slide. There's water work we're doing, transportation, materials management, maybe shooting for a zero waste goal in the future. But I'm going to spend most of my time tonight on the energy piece. So Boise's Energy Future. One of the things when I got to the city was we were being asked to start considering energy goals. And when I asked kind of what we were doing internally, frankly, we weren't doing a whole lot. And so we decided to focus internally first. Because if I feel pretty strongly, if I'm going to ask a developer or if I'm going to ask a company to join us on some kind of goal, I think we need to be able to say pretty openly, okay, these are the things that we're doing. If they ask, well, what are you doing? Here's our list. So just a couple examples. We won't spend much time on this. We're designing new buildings like the fire stations 4 and 8 that have very low energy use intensities. That's a wonky term. Basically a use per square foot, energy use per square foot. We have a new farm admin building. We own a 4,300 acre farm south of town where we apply our biosolids for local food production. And we decided when we built this building to go ahead and experiment with Idaho's first zero net energy building. And it's been a really great learning experience. We've learned a ton of what to do, what maybe not to do in the future. One of the good news stories, it's actually net positive. We're producing more energy than we're using, and that's been a really interesting ride. It's been really neat to watch. So the payback period on that building is right now at about 12 years, which for private sector, that's hard. A 12-year payback period, I get it, that's hard. But for a municipality, if we're gonna have that asset on our books for maybe 60 years, 50 years, you can see that starts to make for better decision-making within a municipality. And then the current activities, actually we just wrapped up, is the Boise Energy Future. So just before we get into the actual work, the clean energy drivers, I talked about the climate change impacts, the carbon footprint. We'll talk a little bit about economic development and what we're seeing from companies around the world. There's a Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance I'll describe here in a second. We'll talk about resiliency and security and local investment. So I talked already about the climate piece, the climate adaptation, climate change piece. So we're trying to get at that 2/3 of the community energy. The cost trends was alluded to earlier on affordability. What we're seeing is just a drop off of a ledge on solar prices. So this is work that's done by Lazard. They're an industry expert that tracks energy prices. And what you're looking at is per megawatt, a levelized cost of energy per megawatt. And it goes down from 2009 to 2017 on solar is down 87% on the price point. So this is driving a lot of different decision making in corporate America because you can see it's getting more competitive, better than coal. It's getting cost competitive with natural gas. So that's leading to companies saying, we want more access to renewable energy. And so this is the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, companies made up of all kinds of interesting cast of characters. And they combined form about $7.8 trillion in market cap. So these aren't small companies. These are big companies like Lockheed Martin, Amazon, IKEA, Marriott. And their whole role, this REBA group, is to get access to renewable energy. In part, it's because the consumers are starting to ask for it, the millennials and Generation Z, but it's also just good business. They're hedging on energy prices. They're getting a fixed price for 20 years, which basically becomes a variable that is no longer of concern to them for the next 20 years. So they're hedging. They may pay a little bit higher amount in the first 5 years of the contract, but on the backside, they'll be saving money. So we're starting to hear this in Boise. When companies are coming to town, they're starting to ask about, can they get access to renewable energy? And what's more is we spend about $145 million a year on fossil fuels in Boise, and that's a combination of natural gas and coal. What if we took that $145 million that we spend every year because it's an O&M cost and reinvested that into renewable energy? That would reduce the long-term costs and certainly be interesting to be able to invest it so that you could start to lure companies to your city. And it also provides some flexibility. You're not as beholden to the international markets that could see some serious swings on natural gas pricing. So all that led to the project background on Boise's Energy Future. So the overall objective was to develop guidance document and establish ambitious yet achievable energy goals. And that's a big point of emphasis with our mayor. He's not real big on just setting goals to set goals. He wants us to study it so that we can set goals that we think are achievable. And we actually have a plan to get there. And so we formed the project team. We had a consultant out of Fort Collins, the Brundle Group, that helped us out. We did a ton of data collection. We started developing goals and opportunities, did a lot of evaluations of the regulatory and the technical aspects, and then the financial piece as well. And there was a huge amount of community engagement. That was an important part of our project. We wanted to get a sense for where the public stood on this. We didn't want to force feed this. We wanted to understand, is this palatable? Where do the citizens sit? And I'll share with you some data sets on that. So we were focused on community energy, which is broken out here. That's the energy to power buildings, both residential and commercial, and other uses. And in Boise, our community energy breaks out as 48% electricity, 50% natural gas, and about 2% our geothermal system downtown. We heat about 6 million square feet of commercial space downtown with our geothermal system. And just note that transportation was not included in this energy plan. We've got a different plan for the transportation side. And then if we go back and look at our 48% electricity, how does that break out on how does Idaho Power provide that 48% of our electricity? And you can see here on what you're looking at are graphs. The gray bar is a 4-year average of the breakout of the sources. And then the blue bar is the 2017 breakout of, so if, for example, for the hydroelectric, the clean energy, about 50% in 2017 was hydroelectric that we received in Boise. About 19% was purchased renewables. About 18% was coal, 8% natural gas, and then 5% purchased non-renewables. And so our project was really focused on making sure we protect the clean and renewable portions, but then how do we start moving the needle on the right side of that chart? And so I mentioned the community engagement piece, and I'm not sure if it's not working okay. So we had a 3-method strategy. We had a technical stakeholder group. We had Idaho Power, Intermountain Gas. Ben Otto was part of the group. We had other conservation group members. We had businesses at the table. And it was really to really sink our teeth into some of the technical issues that we were going to deal with on the project. We had an in-depth community input. There we had very, very focused questions and answers. We had an outreach where we walked around, like we had 3 one-minute videos just asking the community about, when we say, what is energy? Just to start a conversation with the community to see how they would respond. And then we had a broad community survey. We teamed with Boise State University on a community survey that gave us a lot more detailed, statistically relevant data that we could hang our hat on and say, okay, this is actually where the community is sitting. And so this was the survey, Your Voice Counts. We had about 2,200 responses, which for a city survey is kind of unheard of. When we got our numbers back, we were so excited because typically we'll see maybe 100, couple hundred, but we got a lot of great responses, and it was statistically relevant, so that was important to us so that we could describe it to mayor and council in a way that, hey, this is a good cross-section of how the citizens view it. So here are just 2 example questions. So the one on the left, the city of Boise has initiated a planning process. Boise's in their future. Do you agree or disagree with this effort? So we had about 77% agree with the effort, either strongly or somewhat. And then please select your level of agreement with this statement. I'm concerned about the impact of climate change on Boise. Again, about a 77% agree, both somewhat or strongly. So that helped frame that there is an appetite in Boise for us to be taking on these issues. And I'll often describe it to people that I don't want to get into an argument over what's causing the change. The fact is that my job as a public works director is to manage risk, is a big part of it. And so risk is just a probability of something happening and the consequence. And so if there's a probability of some type of risk happening and the consequences are high enough, it is my duty, like I have an obligation to try to manage that for our citizens. And so that's a big part of our job, is we're trying to frame this as really risk costs. If we're not engaged, that's actually exposing our city in ways. And then this was another question: as a city plans a new energy future, which priorities should be considered? You can see the top 2 are clean energy and then affordability. That was a big point of emphasis amongst the citizens, that affordability was a big piece. We're hopeful that that price point coming down on renewables is going to help address that. So the plan contents, we had a breakout of the energy uses and sources, the planning process, the electricity goal roadmap, which I'll share here in a second, and the thermal energy goal and roadmap. And we had all kinds of information on the public outreach and the surveys to mayor and council. We have, moving to the future, we've engaged a lot of our partners on roles and responsibilities and how they can help us as we integrate, or as we implement the plan. And then we had an approach for, over the coming years, tracking every 2 years, and then updating every 5, I think it was. And so all of that to say, where we landed was the electricity goal is 100% of electricity used by the city of Boise's residents. The businesses will be clean by 2035, while prioritizing affordability and access for all. And that affordability and access for all was really important to mayor and council. We didn't want to just set a number out there and then have it get so expensive that it became a burden on the community. And then below is a breakout of how we're going to get there, the 2035 goal. And so you can see those listed. I have a better graphic here. So as we go left to right on the chart, you can see how we're going to get to that 100% goal is a chunk of different pieces, right? So we have 11% is going to be electricity efficiency, energy efficiency. So we're going to try to reduce the amount we're using up front. 51% will be existing utility scale renewables. That would be a combination of hydro and the existing PURPA projects. 24% will be new utility scale renewables, 2% green power procurement, 4% on-site, 8% the existing green power program, leading all to 100% clean electricity by 2035. So these are now, the job is going to get a lot harder. This is kind of the easy part in many ways. Now we actually have to start developing implementation plans for each of these, and we're very engaged with Idaho Power. I feel like I talk to them every week. They've been really good to work with. You probably heard they set their goal of 2045, so we're excited about the partnering opportunities. 2045, I stole my own power, or my own thunder there. Idaho Power goal 2045. And then on thermal energy side, this is a lot harder, frankly. And this is not unique to Boise. This is across the city. We have a lot of challenges around natural gas. And so where we are right now, that actually should be 2021. That's been revised. So make measurable progress on natural gas efficiency and geothermal expansion and identify a quantifiable goal by 2021. So we don't have a quantifiable goal yet for natural gas. We're going to have to work that one pretty hard. That's a pretty big challenge, in part because there's no alternative. There's renewable natural gas, but that's a very small portion of the natural gas market, and it's not there yet on a price point. But there are some new energy efficiency programs that Intermountain Gas is rolling out. We're going to try to leverage that. We're going to partner with them on that program. So we're going to keep working the thermal energy side. And then I mentioned the efficiency programs. The 11% energy efficiency goal is a pretty aggressive goal we're finding as we look across the country. But we think we can get there. For those of you that don't know, Idaho Power has a lot of great programs out there for energy efficiency. That's a home energy efficiency kit that you can get just mailed to your house. Just say you want one, and they'll send it to your house. I'm assuming Pocatello has Idaho Power, right? Mm-hmm. And they have the AC Cool Credit Program, a part of that. The home energy audits they offer for a very reasonable price. So you can get an audit done on how do you make your home more efficient. They have a lot of great business programs. We've taken them up on some of the municipal programs. So the energy efficiency side is very appealing to us, and that's our first focus. Because if we can reduce the upfront energy, then we can reduce the backside capital investment. And then I'll just close with kind of what the future holds for us as we start thinking about our sustainability programs. And we go to a lot of national conferences, and cities are really kind of rethinking the word sustainability in many ways, because it implies that what we have today is sustainable. And we're trying to think of ways to maybe kind of readdress that. Because I think that we can't simply sustain the as-is. We actually have to progress past it. So there's a lot of discussion about the regenerative city, one that looks differently at its resources. So instead of just thinking of things linearly as I buy, I consume, and I throw away, that linear kind of progress, a lot of what we're talking about is just the idea that these things are circular. And so we try to use resources that can be regenerated. That linear to circular flows from consuming to prosuming. So our compost program at the city of Boise is kind of a prosuming. It's a circular. We're actually producing something on the back end that the citizens give us as waste. And so really just thinking differently about what a city could be. And if anybody's a subscriber to National Geographic, there was a great, last month was the city's edition, and it had some really interesting kind of future city graphics. And there's a lot of discussion of the regeneration that cities can perform. And in many ways, it's getting back to what maybe we used to be, right? And I think there's a message here about self-reliance and kind of thinking of yourself as being able to support what you do in your city and not having to reach out or import or that kind of efficiency of self-sustaining. And then just that local action and independence, I think that's something that we're realizing that we need to be taking action. We need to be engaged on the topic. because in many ways we're the ones facing, as I mentioned at the beginning, at the city level. And that's what makes our job so interesting. And I would just close that I think regeneration is hopeful. I can't tell you how tired I am of seeing the graphics of the CO2 parts per million just going up and up, or the temperature going up and up. And it's like, okay, yeah, now we got to start moving on to solutions, because that graphic does not help the single mom or dad with 2 kids. The CO2 concentration at 410 parts per million, okay, so what? Like, how do we start to make a difference and be able to demonstrate to those folks that what we're planning into the future will be better? And it is hopeful. It's hopeful. The sky is not falling. We have challenges, but there are solutions that are developing, and necessity is the mother of invention. We're doing good things. So I think we generally, and we've had this discussion at a couple of national conferences that we go to, we just need to rethink the dialogue and the messaging and how we get folks engaged, because the gloom and doom is not, as much as, folks that believe in it, they get it and they see it, but it's just not resonating. I think we're picking up the pace. I think we have some political leadership that is engaged on the issue, which is great. So I think regeneration is a little more hopeful. And I'll close on that hopeful note. So I'll stand for questions. After. Right. Thank you.
Okay, and so we will move to Kelly's. Okay, so if you need to stand and stretch or make a quick trip to the restroom while Mike gets us set up for the Zoom presentation, now would be a good opportunity.
Does anyone have cards with questions that we could start
Yeah, it's
Yes. I know. Oh, I know. People are always, I think it's the day here, they're always saying, would you like to sit down? Would you like to sit down? It's like after 24 years as a middle school principal, I need to do standing up at home, even though I'm retired. I haven't had a sit-down meal unless it's at a restaurant for, 30 years. It did, but for whatever reason, most of my friends and family think I'm certified. But from the moment, I was a dancer and choreographer until I was 40. And
Yep, I'm here.
a lot of residencies.
Okay, give us a few minutes to get the room back in order, and then we
And
can
from the
begin.
moment I started doing this, I just fell in love with middle school kids. I absolutely adore them. They're like, we ready?
She's on, she's ready. So as soon as it gets room.
Okay, all right. I think we're good to go. So take a final stretch. And,
She's on the line.
okay, and I don't know, I have no idea what I need to do or anything. No one has briefed me on the technical aspects of this.
So Kelly, are you here?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, we can hear you very well, and we see your presentation up on our screen, so I think we're ready to begin.
Great.
All right, perfect.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Well, I missed my introduction, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Kelly Cooper. I'm the Environmental Education and Sustainability Technician with the City of Moscow. So, I'm going to start with a quick overview of our greenhouse gas inventory program, which is really what has sort of started our sustainability efforts. So in 2007, they passed a resolution for climate protection and a pledge to join ICLEI. And since then, we have passed 3 more resolutions, all dealing with climate and our reduction goals. Currently, our goal is 20% reduction of 2008 greenhouse gas levels by next year. So far, we've had some major reductions in traffic signal, due to traffic signal upgrades. We've had a 9% reduction in our streetlights and traffic signals sector. We've also installed some variable frequency drives and energy efficiency upgrades to our water system, specifically with our boosters, which has helped gain a little bit of efficiency there. And we've had some upgrades for the pool, for LED street and deck, or security and deck lights, as well as the boiler. And fleet reductions has seen our biggest reduction yet, thanks to our eco-driver program, which we'll go into a little bit more later. And then we've had some LED lighting upgrades in some of our city facilities. So this is what that actually ultimately looks like. So the top bar is our 2008 greenhouse gas levels. This is for local government operations only. So we have not done a community-wide inventory as of yet. I'm hoping to get that going here pretty soon. So 2008, we had 4,724 metric tons of CO2 equivalents, and we've brought that down to 4,083 metric tons CO2 equivalents, so about a 13.5% reduction. You'll also notice a lot of these sectors are highly energy driven. Water and wastewater is really highly dependent to pump water out, pump it around the city, and then to treat it again. Requires a lot of energy. So we're really looking at those energy efficiencies for the future. So these are some potential future projects we've got to reduce that even further. Right now we're looking at potential LED streetlight upgrades to all of our city-owned streetlights. We've also done some alternative fuels research for our city fleet. We have 1 electric vehicle as of right now, and we are looking to add 2 hybrids for police operations by fiscal year 2020. And then we're looking at solar specifically for city facilities, especially at our pool, as it's very publicly visible, and it's the one everybody thinks about when they think solar for the city. And then we will talk about some Y-scapes later. We are looking at expanding that this spring and retrofitting several fixtures and going with some more variable VFDs, or variable frequency drives. All right, so ongoing programs. Our eco-driver program has been highly successful. So it was implemented in 2012. Prior to 2012, we're seeing a 4% increase in fuel use every year. And then since then, we've actually seen roughly a 3 to 4% decrease every year in fuel. So we have seen some huge numbers with that. Mostly it is run by, let me start that sentence over. Mostly that savings has been due to right-sizing the fleet. So we look at, when it comes time to replace a vehicle, we look at the job it does and make sure that the size of the vehicle and the efficiency of the vehicle matches the job it does. So even though, somebody might be used to running a big 2-ton truck or something, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get a replacement 2-ton truck when it comes time to replace it. If they don't need it for the job they do, then they don't get it. But it's been highly successful. We did have a little bit of a bump up in 2018, mostly due to snow. Because with more trucks going out for more snow, that means we have an increased fuel use. But we're still well below our 2011 baseline year. So same thing, just looking at it a little graphically for those visual people out there. And then, as I said, we're looking to the future with alternative fuels. So we have several vehicles targeted to transition to all electric. We are purchasing 2 hybrid police SUVs in our next budget cycle, pending approval, of course. By the time all of the city police vehicles are transitioned, we're expecting to save another 10,000 gallons of fuel a year, which will, of course, reduce our greenhouse gas inventory further. Water conservation program is huge here. We have a declining aquifer in Moscow, so we have to look at water conservation pretty heavily. In 2016, the city had officially adopted an updated water conservation plan, which included adding rebates for fixture replacements and turf to Yscape. So this is just a look at what we offer as far as our toilet rebates. And we do both professional and do-it-yourself installations, which some places don't do. We don't require an inspection before and after. We can do it either by the plumber simply writing on their receipt, you know, what they took out and what they put in, or by pictures. So this is what the success we've had thus far. So we save, just by the fixture rebates we've done thus far, we save about 2.3 million gallons of water annually. Our numbers have been going up since the beginning of the program, and they're still climbing with our latest fiscal year. Along with that, we like to practice what we preach here. So we actually went through and we upgraded, with some of that water conservation money, we upgraded the city fixtures at the city hall. So we went from these older 3.5 gallon per flush toilets to way more efficient 2.8 gallon per flush toilets. Lawn to Yscape, we've seen some other very significant savings here. So with our lawn rebate, it's $150 to remove 300 plus square feet of existing lawn to water efficient landscaping. So xeriscaping, for those of you who don't know what Yscape means. So we've had pretty significant numbers there. Then that number continues to climb. We're finding that most people take out well over 300 square feet when they do these, so this is just a little added bonus for them to get some money back for some plants. Why Yscape? So in addition to water conservation, we also noticed that it takes a lot less labor. We tracked the one we put in at City Hall to see just what the inputs and outputs look like. We noticed minimal water use, less labor, low chemical use. We reduced our greenhouse gas input there. It's way prettier, as you can see by this picture, and increased diversity, attracted pollinators, and it's far more colorful than just green grass. So just a quick comparison on the actual numbers. Traditional lawn this size before we implemented this took about 20,000 or almost 21,000 gallons of fuel, used 79 pounds of carbon dioxide into the air, and that's from things like lawnmowers, weed eaters, and any other sort of gasoline equipment that we needed to use out there. Since we put in the Yscape, we've only used 4,600 gallons of water and only produced about 15 pounds of carbon dioxide. And again, here we see a breakdown of labor and fertilizer and herbicide fuel costs. So it took about 24 hours to maintain this over our irrigation season, and about $63.45 in fertilizers. And then we have 3.5 hours of labor and zero cost for fertilizers, herbicides. So pretty significant savings there. In addition, our water reclamation reuse facility, we have, switching gears a little bit, our system uses a biological nutrient removal process to treat wastewater, so we have limited chemical use. All of our solids are sent for composting, so we can reduce our footprint there, and we only add a little bit of chlorine before it actually the effluent is put into the creek. In the summer months, our effluent is actually diverted to U of I, to be the University of Idaho, to use on their green spaces. So last year that was 90 million gallons of water that was reused before it ended up in our creek, which also saved that from having to be pumped out of our aquifers. And waste-wise events. So this is my favorite. This is one of my, well, not my favorite, but one of my favorites. I actually created this program when I came on as an AmeriCorps member in 2016. This is an internal initiative. It reduces waste from employee gatherings. There's a lot of paper plates and plastic silverware that go into these things. So I switched everything to compostable ware that is then composted by our waste removal company, Lake-Tahoe Sanitation. So I buy and use compostable ware, and then I monitor the stations for recycling, compost, and landfill. Most of these events come out with less than 5 pounds of trash, and mostly that is plastic wraps from food, or it's from tablecloths that the people in charge of these events buy for the tables. So it's been highly successful. It started out as something I had to invite myself to do, and now it's turned into something that people actually email and request. So I'm really quite proud of that program. And then we have our public information and education program. So this is our K through 12 education programming. This mainly focuses on water conservation, also covers stormwater as well. Our lessons meet state standards, and we offer field trips and tours of our water treatment facilities as well as our wastewater treatment facilities. And we also offer adult education programming such as Yscape classes and presentations on water issues and city infrastructure to any interested groups, and we offer tours for them as well. This is one of our latest and greatest, newest programs that as well as our citizens are really excited about. This year we are transitioning to a chemical-free weed control alternative. Prior to this year, we saw our rights-of-way weed program increasing in cost, and it's been increasingly hard to get bids to come in and do our rights-of-way weed control. So this year we have found a chemical-free program, so we can reduce that human health aspect. We can reduce the costs, that we can actually realize the savings in a really quick time frame. This will pay for itself within a year, and it's internal, so we have better quality control. And this is what that looks like. So we're going with a hydrothermal weed control, uses hot water and or steam, saturated steam. Basically, it boils the water in the plant until the cell walls explode, and then it's localized. We can apply in any weather. We don't have to worry about overspray, and the rain obviously can't wash it away because it's just water. So this is how this will work. So the picture on this picture here is what typical right-of-way weed control we're looking at, where the weeds are filling in the cracks, coming out, and just basically looks pretty ugly. We come in with our new device and sprays the weeds directly, and then we get something that looks nice and pretty, like this other scene over here. And this is what our actual mount looks like. We went with a skid-mounted unit with a tank because we can move it between multiple vehicles, so we can always have a vehicle that can use it, one-person operation, and it's been very cost-effective for us, so we can make that financial argument. We have 2 programs that we're working on in development for sustainability, the first being our stormwater utility. We are still working on our Phase 2 National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NEPDES permit, and hopefully it will be effective this October, and it will require a stormwater program and fund operations and maintenance for our stormwater system. And then this is just some more information on that, on when our Phase 1 and Phase 2 were completed. And this is another one of my programs, the Environmental Stewardship Award Program. It's designed to recognize and reward local businesses to help them reduce their environmental impacts. Also helps us figure out helps us share information with our business community as far as what can be done, what would help them, what would help us, and this will play a huge part when it comes to doing a community-scale greenhouse gas inventory. So I'm really looking forward to the rollout of this program. It was just approved in early April by our city council, so we're hoping to roll it out by the beginning of next fiscal year. And so these are what our awards will actually look like. We'll have 2 certification levels. The first is bronze and then silver, the idea being that we can add gold and platinum later as we get more and more businesses involved and as our list of criteria increases. And then the verification process will be done by the sustainability technician and renewed every 2 years. All right, I went through that super fast, but does anybody have any questions?
So, Kelly, we're going to wait and take questions at the end.
Okay.
So if you could stay on the line, it would be terrific. Obviously, we can't see you, so you could, get into your jammies and have a cup of tea, and we'll never know. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I put you on speakerphone so I don't have to hold the phone.
So with that, we will move on to Paul Campbell.
Okay, I'm pleased to be here. I'm from Campbell Scientific in Logan, Utah. I do feel like I have some roots and branches in Idaho because my parents are both from Idaho, and I have my wife and I have 3 of our 5 children and 12 of our 16 grandchildren that live in Idaho. So we spend about half our time in Idaho. And Campbell Scientific in Logan started in 1974. We have about, between Campbell Scientific and Juniper Systems, a subsidiary, about 450 employees there, and about twice that number worldwide with the number of international offices for the company. Some of the applications I'll mention, I mean, you can see we're an instrument manufacturer, so you can see like weather stations used in agriculture for optimizing irrigation. You can see some of these pictures that have to do with hydrology and water management. Idaho Department of Water Resources is an important customer, as are the universities in Idaho. You can see this picture. It's some equipment that that we manufacture that is used for measuring the flux of carbon dioxide uptake by plants during the day when there's photosynthesis, or the microbial respiration where there's some outgassing of carbon dioxide at night. Also instruments that are used to measure energy balance. And of course the big issue with climate change is how the increased levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are changing energy balance at the Earth's surface. So that's a little about what we do. We've made some improvements over time. That picture on the right is a tracking solar panel that we built about 7 or 8 years ago. And about 20% of the instruments that we manufacture are used in renewable energy, mostly at utility scale, where they're looking for either site prospecting or to evaluate the performance of generating equipment. We've in addition to that tracking solar array, we also have invested in some building efficiencies we have about 160,000 square feet of space. And back in the 1980s, we actually did some architectural design on our building to incorporate passive solar heating. We have a warm water well on site, and so we use that to recover some energy that we use. And in our last building that was finished in 2011, we're capturing some of that heat and redistributing it through reversible heat pumps that we incorporated into the HVAC design of the building. I'm not getting, oh, there we go, okay. Just a little bit of latency on the switch here. So some of our recent efforts, we created a sustainability committee in late 2017 in the company, and they're tending to focus on working toward a majority of our energy use from renewables. they'd like to see us cut our carbon emissions by at least 20%. I'm not sure the time frame of that committee. They want to see us achieve Underwriter Laboratories landfill waste diversion validation. And another point of the committee is to stimulate a culture of sustainability through community engagement in Logan City and Cache Valley. In terms of us looking at our carbon footprint, the committee anticipates using this greenhouse gas protocol, ghgprotocol.org, with the standards that they would apply or use. And maybe I'm not pointing this in the right. Okay, let's try this. But certainly working on more renewable energy. On our site, we could cite probably up to 500 kilowatts of solar panels. Now, that has to be coordinated with the city and our electrical system and everything. I don't know how economical or just how all of the details of that would work out. But I look at Campbell Scientific 10 or 20 years from now, and probably the biggest difference in terms of on-site renewable energy, it would be solar generation. Working with Logan City Power and Light toward reducing that carbon footprint. And on carbon emissions, we need to do more in defining where we're at, compiling a record of accounting for the last fiscal year, and then looking at that in terms of goals and reporting to our stakeholders. In terms of waste recycling, there's things to be completed on that the committee identified was waste to landfill reduction. And that's more of an assessment and evaluating our recycling practices on site, minimizing our single-use plastics and paper, and identifying alternatives to the urethane foam packing that we use for shipping. Our instruments arrive at our customer locations in great condition, but that we recognize that the urethane foam that we use is a pain for them with landfills and so forth. And so in our particular processes, that's probably pretty high priority for our customers. We're fortunate that Logan City has a high priority for some of this work. They have a Renewable Energy and Conservation Advisory Board. One of our employees serves on that board at the present time and has for several years. These are passionate citizens in the community, and some of them bellwether users. There's also a member of that board that is from Utah State University, and several others that are interested citizens in the community. That's been worthwhile. There's a positive history of encouragement coming from Logan City, a supportive city council that puts, for example, there's quite a few residents in Logan City that have put solar panels on their homes because the city, with control over their pricing policies, had put in place a very favorable cogeneration policy where they said, we will reduce your electric bill exactly the amount that it costs us to go out and buy the wholesale energy. So when we save that cost, that comes right off your bill from Logan Power and Light. That was a very progressive cogeneration policy that the city put in place 7 or 8 years ago, maybe close to 10 years ago. If anything, they're starting to complain. The management at the city is complaining a bit because the amount of renewable energy coordinated with the amount of non-renewable energy is a problem for how, when the sun shines, it's there in abundance, and when it doesn't shine, it becomes a real coordination problem operationally for the city. There's a positive influence from the university, Utah State University, that I think is very helpful. As a demonstration of the forward thinking on sustainability, the city is in the process of putting a new landfill in, And so they're putting the infrastructure in now in the landfill that'll allow the capture of biogas 20 years from now. I mean, it'll take about 20 years to accumulate enough waste to make biogas capture worthwhile, economic, or feasible. But they're putting that in place now. I think that's very forward-looking by the city to do that. With regard to our purchase of electricity from Logan Power and Light, we appreciate the important supplier and community relationship that is a part of that. We're unlikely to pursue independent generation outside of some locally mounted solar panels that I've mentioned. We want to encourage cooperation with a common goal to reduce carbon footprint. So I see that very much lock in step with the city. Waiting for the next slide to come up. Here we go. Why prioritize sustainability? This was a question that Linda asked in our email correspondence. We have a number of stakeholders that I think this matters to. When this comes up, it matters to our employees and to our, we think it matters to some of our customers. I mean, we don't see it. Maybe the batteries are running low on this, do you think?
I don't know. I'll move this up so it's more direct line of sight.
We'll see. Let me keep going here. Matters to some of our customers. We occasionally see in bid specifications, and it's usually more international than domestic, where you see a customer who is asking for, what are your sustainability policies, or, do you follow a sustainability standard like ISO 14001, things like that. We occasionally see that, not very much. Maybe it's something we might see more of in the future. I don't know. Our shareholders, it's interesting. We're a for-profit enterprise, and so we recognize that we have to balance the shareholders' interests with what we invest in reducing carbon footprint for the company, and we want to be sort of in step with the community around us. So balance is, in my mind, is a pretty big issue, and our board of directors is responsible for maintaining that balance. I say at what price? We recognize that we can go out and buy carbon offsets for what, $15 a metric ton, something like that is what the carbon market looks like right now, and that makes sense to me for some things like commercial air travel or something like that, where it would be difficult to find some other alternative. But I personally, I'm hesitant to buy in heavily to purchase carbon offsets, just because because I think we can do more if we will work with our energy suppliers in reducing the carbon footprint than just going out and buying carbon offsets. So I'm not a big fan of that. In terms of economics, I follow with interest the cost of direct extraction of CO2 from the atmosphere. And there was a recent article I saw in The Economist, a business magazine, that talked about a project in British Columbia where a company was claiming CO2 extraction for about $100 a metric ton. In terms of their cost. And I look at that, by the way, there was one of the other slides earlier on that showed the declining cost of renewable energy, and you look at that $100 a metric ton to extract it from the atmosphere versus $15 a metric ton that's sort of a cost on the carbon market to sequester carbon, mostly through photosynthesis. And it's not too far out of reach to think that 10, 20 years from now, we could be looking at $10 a metric ton to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. There's the cost of sequestration from point source emissions. Again, you run across the occasional article that talks about a utility that puts in place some geological carbon sequestration associated with the emission at the point of coal-fired or gas-fired generation. And to me, I'm not seeing anything that encouraging about the economics of it, but I think that it's still important. I look at this time horizon to 2050 and beyond in terms of finding balance, and I think we have to maintain some public sector commitment to the technology development around that. And then probably the most encouraging thing is the cost of renewable energy. And I'm the proponent, employee proponent in the company, sent me a link to a slide it was earlier today, and it basically advertised that you're seeing these power purchase agreements coming in at under $30 per megawatt hour at the wholesale level on solar in like California and Arizona, which is it's incredible. I mean, it's starting to compete directly with the cost of fossil fuel energy. And then there's the cost of non-emitting energy, nuclear. I just mention it because I think that we probably shouldn't lose sight of it as a non-emitting technology. It's not economic, but it does ramp, with the exception that these renewable energy sources of wind and solar primarily don't ramp up or ramp down easily. Idaho has this great advantage of the of hydro and renewable energy, which does ramp up and down to offset that. We don't have that in Utah, and I suspect nuclear may have to factor in at some point to get there. Capital improvements are always a good thing for us to require less future fossil fuel energy, and what we've done on our building efficiencies is to try and capitalize on that. Wanted to mention briefly the natural gas contribution on the carbon footprint. It was interesting to me, natural gas is very economic. It's certainly an improvement over coal, but the infrastructure, the pipe infrastructure of the gas companies is starting to be used to capture biogas, and you might see that more from feedlot operations in southern Idaho. We're seeing it on hog farm operations in Millard County in Utah, where Dominion Energy is capturing biogas to include in their distribution network. Linda wanted me to mention the bicycle park at Campbell Scientific. To me, its significance is in the new thinking when it was built in 1992. I was opposed. There was another corporate officer that was passionate about doing it, and in the end, it ended up being a really good thing, and it's represented a change in my thinking and mind as to how to look at sustainability. And it's used by about 2 to 5% of our employees, depending on the weather, primarily. We work on recycling waste. We have containers and work with the city on that. We do a lot in metals in our manufacturing, a lot of subtractive manufacturing with metals, and so we recycle metals, we recycle waste electronics. We do some recycling of plastics. That's probably our weakest point. The connection between Campbell Scientific and Pocatello, since I'm talking in Pocatello, we have a number of ISU graduates. They have a great robotics program, and so the students that come out of that are very well schooled in electronics and electromechanical troubleshooting and things. So we have about a dozen ISU graduates working at Campbell Scientific. Some great customer relationships, both with ISU and a number of institutions in Idaho. And with economic development in Pocatello, I hope to take a look at research competencies at ISU. Campbell Scientific isn't a direct spin out from Utah State University, but we've grown up in their shadow and really appreciate the relationship with the university. We hope that you can grow some of your existing businesses that care about the quality of the community. And in conclusion, I would just say that our carbon footprint improvement at Campbell Scientific depends on internal business success, supportive stakeholders, and external coordination with our community. We need these tech-savvy personnel, and ISU is a good source. And Kind of a question for other panelists in my mind is what's a good planning premium in dollars per ton per year of CO2? Or, I need something that when I sit down with my board of directors, I can talk about this. And I'd be interested in what you do when you're talking to the city council or something like that. What's a good planning premium to use? And thank you.
And with that, thank you very much. We will move on to Ben.
All right. Well, thank you all for inviting me down here. I'm Ben Otto. I'm the Energy Associate for the Idaho Conservation League. I live in Boise, and that's where our headquarters is. We are 15 people in that office, and then we have 3 in Sandpoint and 3 in Ketchum. And since 1973, I've been working to protect the air quality and water quality and wilderness and wildlife and the communities of Idaho. And so that's been pretty fun work. I've had this job since 2009, where we really ramped up our engagement in energy and particularly electricity issues in Idaho in response to, the changing climate and the air pollution that we were seeing. But that was just a ramping up of what we had been doing for years. So when we were first started in the late 70s, there was a giant coal plant proposed for right outside Boise. And a bunch of citizens got together and said, this doesn't make sense. There's other cheaper alternatives, which was interesting. So that's like in the middle 70s, and it's kind of the same argument today we all still make. But that won. The Idaho Power didn't build the plant, and since then, following on, we worked with the Public Utilities Commission to start the first utility-sponsored energy conservation programs to engage in how the utilities make their plans for the future so that they fairly assess the full cost of what they have and the full opportunity of whether their alternatives are out there. And that's a big part of our work. It's a big, important thing to do because you only get the power company that's handed to you, right? You don't get to choose a different one. They all have their monopoly service territory, and in exchange for that, they submit to state regulation. And so instead of a competitive market where if you wanted to buy a different car with different characteristics or different pricing, you could do that. Well, you can't do that here. So you got to influence your decision makers, your utility, and your electric utility, the other utilities, and get what you want out of them. So that's what we've been doing, and that's what you can do here. I think it was really interesting hearing from the city of Boise. We were really engaged in that process throughout, just kind of watching what they did to engage with citizens first and see if setting a clean energy goal was a community priority, and it was. And so then I appreciated the fact of actually setting not just some goal that's out there, but there's a plan. This goal is thought out. There's been analysis of the cost and the achievability. That was a good process to be involved in. And one that I think any city could do. And it was interesting hearing Paul talk about really kind of a similar thing, but just happening within a private company. Thinking about this idea of, we have resources that we have to spend. We have, energy is a resource and materials are a resource. Being more efficient with that allows you to be a more efficient business, but also that community engagement aspect I think was really interesting. So those are some introductory thoughts. I was asked, I don't have anything prepared because I was asked to kind of sum up. So I wanted to sit here and listen to what I heard on the panel and kind of what I heard in the room and what I thought about today, and then offer some thoughts. So I'm going to do that. And particularly around some opportunities. So one thing that's really interesting about cities and communities is the ability to think more comprehensively. So in my work, I have to address the electric utility in their world and their regulators, and then the gas utility in their world and the Intermountain Gas and their same regulators, but they're very different. And they have their own programs, but nobody's kind of looking at them holistically. Each company has their incentive to do their own thing. And the regulators, the Public Utilities Commission, just kind of sits over and calls balls and strikes. They're not operating programs. So one thing a city can do, a community can do, is say like, hey, we want to figure out if you're insulating a home or a business, that's going to help you save electricity and also going to help you save on natural gas. A little bit of money from each doesn't really get people excited, but combining that stream together, that's something a city can definitely do. Combining the streams of incentives together, combining the marketing effort together, the engagement effort with the citizens, you can see a big uptick in the participation in the programs that exist today. And you can feel secure in doing that because the state makes sure that those programs are cost effective. They measure down to the penny that what you're getting by energy efficiency works by encouraging you to use less. That means the utility doesn't have to go out and produce that energy or buy it. And so there's a cost to going and doing that. So if we can encourage you to do less for less than the cost of buying it, then everybody saves money. And the state has a very good system to make sure that's true. So encouraging people to participate in the existing programs is a nice, safe place to start. And cities and communities can do a really interesting thing of combining together the various things that insulating a home is saving a bunch of things. If you heat with wood, it helps there too. So an idea for something to do, work with your city or community leaders to have these whole home energy conservation programs or community energy conservation programs that think about combining electricity and heat and gas into one comprehensive thing. People are naturally competitive, and so sometimes that's an idea to get, to have a framework, but how do you get people to actually use it? There's a lot of examples and resources out there to start these community competitions. There's one called Kilowatt Crackdown, which gets commercial buildings to compete against each other, who can save energy the most, and they'll provide, the Department of Energy helps run these programs. They can help provide the baseline data for you to understand and some tools, and then some tools to also promote the stuff, and you give people awards, and people are just competitive. I mean, just think about it. If your neighbor, if some other business, your competitor over town is saving 5% on their power bill, you're going to be motivated to probably do the same thing. It works really well. So you could get neighborhoods competing, schools, like kids are super competitive, right? So you get the schools competing over saving. You get the little kids competing against the high school. I mean, you can do this. This could be pretty neat. And that idea of giving people a reason to change a behavior and then an opportunity to practice is a really important part of these big energy conservation programs. As people do that and they practice and participate, then they say, hey, this is making sense. Let's spread these benefits to others. And you can start going for policy changes. You can ask for city ordinances or state ordinances that help to complement the programs and the practicing that you've encouraged people to do through these competitions. So the idea of a city competition, getting churches competing against each other, anything. I always dreamed about getting dorms at the college, just getting competing dorms. Who can save the most energy? So there's there's competitions, and there's also promotions. I think it was the city of Moscow talked about an award that they give out to somebody who does the best thing. People like awards, they really do. Idaho Power gives away energy efficiency awards. I know On Semiconductor has won at least once, if not more than once. The city or the community could have an energy conservation award, a clean energy award. These are simple things that really do get people excited and give you an opportunity to tell the story and promote it over time. We worked on a project. There's a way to get some kind of co-benefits out of this. So the nice thing about energy efficiency is you save money, so that's good for the city budget. You can also, we worked on a project called the Dark Skies Initiative, which was centered around this Ketchum and Stanley and the Sawtooth, and it's preserving one of the really core dark sky portions of this country. And craters of the moon is also a place that could have that. Pocatello could have that. I mean, it's pretty. You guys are on the cusp here. Dark skies initiatives are interesting in that it's a lot of energy conservation that happens. You're not wasting all that light that's flying off into the atmosphere. You're keeping it focused. You have good public health and safety benefits because the quality of light that's good for protecting your ability to see stars actually allows you to see in low light situations, and you can see better in dark sky approved lighting than in super bright lights. And there's tourism that's happening. People will travel to see starry skies. So there's a dark sky initiative is an interesting thing to think about. It gets people thinking about, it combines a couple interests beyond just the environment, but you have a bunch of knock-on benefits that go with it. The last thing I want to talk about is that energy is, I've focused traditionally around electricity, and a lot of people think about electricity. We talk some about natural gas, but I really think about the three major energy systems. So there's electricity, natural gas, and then transportation. And in Idaho, by far, our number one source of climate pollution and air pollution is cars and transportation. It's also we import 100% of our vehicle fuels. That's about $4 billion at a statewide level that we send out to import fuels. Imagine taking all that money and reinvesting it locally in our transportation services. That's a lot of money to invest in transportation. You get all the knock-on benefits from investing those dollars. That $4 billion that we spend every year, it all leaves. You don't get any additional economic benefit. So if you spend that money in town on an infrastructure project, those workers get paid and they go to the store and they buy stuff. Productivity happens. So this idea of reinvesting our transportation dollars in Idaho is a really powerful idea for growing our economy. It's also really affordable. Powering your car with electricity is it's about the same as 25 cent per gallon gasoline. So that's a good deal. Fleets are really well suited for this. So like a municipal fleet, you heard about the police department doing this. Big trucks and buses are really well suited to be retrofitted because they have that big frame where you can just rip out the diesel and put in batteries and electric motors. So huge local public health benefits, really big savings, operations and maintenance benefits. They perform better for these heavy, short haul stuff. Electricity is really well suited for that. And most fleet managers know exactly how far the car travels, so it's really, it's a manageable thing. And our electric grid is increasingly clean. As you saw, Idaho Power had committed to 100% clean by 2045. It's going to happen way faster than that. Just recently, they announced their long-term plan. 5 of the 7 coal units they have an interest in, they'll be out of by 2026. That's less than 10 years away. The other 2 are being assessed for how long they'll last. And then they have a few natural gas plants, but through various metrics, you can just kind of really control and limit the amount that they're even relied upon. And that's because of the hydroelectric backbone and the incredibly cheap clean energy that we're seeing available. So you just maybe saw in the paper, there was an article about a project south of Twin Falls, big solar farm there for $21 a megawatt hour. That's probably the cheapest ever in the country. It's incredible how fast the prices are coming down, and with our hydroelectric backbone in the system, Idaho Power is well suited to integrate these types of renewables. So thinking about transportation is a really interesting way to go beyond the traditional thing of what do we need to do to protect our climate. It's really the thing that's going to impact your local air quality the most. And it's a thing that really could change a lot of the economic flows in your community in a significant way. So it's something I encourage you all to think a lot about. It'll take time though, because we need the car manufacturers to start making trucks and better things. So that's what I had in sum. I think you have some really cool opportunities here. You can combine these different streams of efficiency programs that are available into a coherent package. These community competitions and awards are great vehicles to get people motivated. Thinking about transportation is a really fruitful way, and And that's all to take advantage of this incredibly cheap, clean energy that's out there and available for us. So thanks for inviting me down.
Great. So let's give a round of applause for our panelists, including Kelly. Thanks. And we'll move on to questions. So Kelly, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so the first question is for you. It is, what is the dollar cost difference between purchasing compostable utensils, plates, etc., compared with non-compostable items? And question 2, how does purchasing compostable items affect the city budget?
Those are both great questions. So I found, because I buy in bulk, I don't just buy what we need for that party. I buy enough to supply multiple events at a time. So I find that it's actually very cost comparative. It might be 1 or 2 cents difference per unit. And because it's only being purchased once and used at multiple events, it actually would save money once we finish getting through all the current stuff that we have stashed elsewhere. I'm finding a lot of things keep showing up that are non-compostable, mostly because they've been hiding somewhere in a cupboard that nobody remembered they were there, and then they come out to use them, or they have bought more because they don't remember that they have that. So with everything coming out of mine, I keep a very good inventory. So I know what's there and I know what's not, so I can order as needed rather than buying even though we already have it. Does that make sense?
Thank you. And I was just quickly sorting through our question cards to see if we had others for you so we can kind of be efficient with your time. So here's another 2-part question. How much money has the city of Moscow saved per year due to all the changes? And could you provide a better explanation of how the Eco Driver program works, and is the program transferable to other cities?
Okay. I don't know that I have an all-around, all-encompassing number as far as how much money the city has saved on all these various initiatives, as some have been cost out, like our water conservation program, for instance. We actually pay out those rebates, so that's more of we lose money, but we get that water conservation that we really need. So it's a justifiable cost for us, whereas others like EcoDriver save us a lot of money because we're not paying $2.69 a gallon for fuel on that. So I don't have an exact number on that. I think it basically weighs itself out in the end, or we wouldn't be able to keep doing these things. As far as EcoDriver, that's a pet project of Tyler Palmer, but the way it works is it actually has 2 parts. The first part is that we look at what a vehicle is needed. So we have reduced the number of vehicles in our fleet by combining uses. So instead of having one truck that sits for half the year and then another truck is used the other half and then they switch, we have one truck that does both jobs, things like that. So we're just looking at smarter purchasing decisions. If we can combine uses, we combine them. If a truck or a vehicle is less efficient for the job that it does and we can find a more efficient one, we go with that. For example, our police fleet, we actually switched from Crown Victorias when they were no longer being made. We switched to Ford Escape or a Ford SUV, I forget which one, because they were actually more fuel efficient than the Crown Vics anyway, and all the other similar models to the Crown Vics when we had to make that switch. So we switched to those, and now we're switching to the SUVs that are hybrids because we'll get an even more fuel efficient vehicle that will do the job. The other part of that is driver training. So all city employees are required to take an EcoDriver training course, which requires us to use the fleet efficiently. So instead of driving in the most fuel efficient manner, essentially. So it is highly transferable to other places. I'm pretty sure we got it from another city as well, and we made, we just tweaked it a little bit to be Moscow specific. Oh my goodness, I can't talk this evening. So yeah, it's definitely something that we would gladly provide more information on how it works and how it's worked for us, because it's made tremendous difference as far as our fleet goes.
Thanks, Kelly. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me or not, but I think for the public access TV, I have to be near a mic. And the mic is, a ways from the phone. So I don't know if you'll be able to hear and participate in further questions or not. If not, thank you. If you can hear me, Yahoo, just, shout out when you've got something to say in response to a question that is directed toward anyone on the panel.
All right, perfect.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Boise question. Mm-hmm. So has Boise developed an incentive program for commercial and residential users to lower carbon footprints? If so, can you describe it and how successful it has been?
We haven't yet. That's kind of in the plan. As part of the Boise's Energy Future, there's discussion about how do we engage the commercial sector and the private sector on incentivizing them to participate. Part of, I think a lot of our work is going to be teaming with Idaho Power. It's difficult for cities to justify using, in certain cases, general fund money to just give to companies because they're more efficient or because they have a smaller carbon footprint. So I think a lot of the work will require us to team with Idaho Power. But we don't have a program just yet for that, but we are actively engaging those folks moving forward.
Okay. This is for anybody. Could a city become a solar farm city with solar panels on every house or business and generate all the power it needs?
I'd like to offer a
Go for it.
I'd like to offer a comment on that, and it's just that I think one of the big technology challenges that's out there, and I because who knows, it could be ISU or U of I, Boise State, that comes up with a solution, but it's basically energy storage. You've got to solve the energy storage problem that will take a little more technology development. Now, in terms of looking at different storage technologies, certainly hydropower is very complementary. And if you go look at how they've done, and there may be hydroelectric installations in Idaho that are similar, I don't know, but I've seen Grand Coulee Dam and how they did that, and how they have an elevated lake. I can't remember, Long Lake, is that what they?
Banks Lake.
Banks Lake? Okay, and so their turbines that generate electricity become pumps to put water up into Banks Lake when the energy isn't needed for demand, and then it's reversible, so they can recover that energy when there is the demand for it. It's very it's an amazing piece of engineering work that dates back to the 1930s or something, or 1940ish. I mean, it was the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s that initiated that Grand Coulee project. But at any rate, I think that to answer that question, you've got to have really a good energy storage solution that's locally available. And there are utility scale battery technologies, things like that are improving all the time. But if a community is interested in it, they've got to invest in the storage side of that.
I want to add to that. That's right. There's like two answers to this. There's the technically, like how do you do it technically and keep the lights on and keep it reliable, and storage and other technologies, like a mix of technologies, is really important for that. The other is kind of the legal, can you do that? And because here in Pocatello, it'll be very hard. You are a customer of Idaho Power. They're the provider of electricity. It's not legal for you to sell power to your neighbor. You can only sell it to Idaho Power, and they're the one who sells. There's a question whether a city as an elected government has a different relationship, but I'm going to put that to the side for now because that's pretty controversial. I was in Idaho Falls earlier today. That's a different situation. Idaho Falls is its own municipal electric utility. They could choose to go and make all these investments in the technology side and go and do it. Pocatello, you could choose to, but you would have a much harder conversation with your incumbent utility than if you just own the utility. So I think it's a thing. You could technically, you'd have to figure it out, and then regulatory wise, you'd have to figure it out. But you see cities trying to. I think I personally think Idaho Falls could be an interesting example in our region.
Here's a question for you, Ben. Are there any plans to impact state legislators to try to get them to address lowering Idaho's carbon footprint?
Well, I'm happy to report that this year was the first ever formal hearing in the legislature on climate impacts in Idaho. And they listened. A committee, the Energy and Environment Technology Committee in the House, had a hearing, and they heard from experts about impacts and what to do. And that's a good thing when people hear and listen to stuff. I wish I could have more to report. I do think you had in the introduction mentioned that it wasn't you, sorry, but Linda in the introduction, that there's been some real change really recently. So you have Governor Little. I can't discount his statements and kind of creating space for people to talk about the changes that they're seeing on the land is important. And then Governor Simpson, or not Governor, but Representative Simpson coming out and saying he was focused around salmon, but there's a climate angle to that. And big businesses are starting to step up and say they care about this stuff. So I think that I wouldn't have said this 6 months ago, and now I have a slightly different, more hopeful message that maybe there is some space to do something at the political level.
Okay. Steve, how does Boise integrate their sustainable plan with smaller towns engulfed by Boise's sprawl? I'm seeing Jaws here. What is the overall plan, and is the county involved?
So we have, the other cities are asking questions about what we're up to. I think one of the things that we talk a lot about the city, and it's important, like every city has their own set of values. And it's not for us to tell another city, you need to do this or you need to do that. I feel very strongly about that. And all of the different cities around the state are leaders in different areas. But Pocatello, on the water supply side, that Palisades purchase, I think it was Palisades years ago, that was visionary. I wish we had done something like that in Boise. I think other cities are leading the way. City Meridian is leading on wastewater reuse, Class A reuse. So it's really important that we don't, we want to work with folks. They'll reach out to us. We share information. We're more than happy to do that. We reach out to some of the other cities to learn about what they're up to. It is a challenge because not all cities have the same values, and it's, again, not that it's right or wrong, it just is. So we try to find areas where we can partner, and then we try to, influence where we can, and it's a challenge. Just leave it at that. But it's not one that's like a confrontational. We try to just work together as best we can in the areas that seem ripe.
Paul, this is for you. How was the Logan City Advisory Panel created? What brought that into existence?
I would get, and Jack, you might know more than I do about it. All I know is that if you go into their website and read about that, it came about, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, and it was created by initiative from being proposed by concerned citizens like you folks and the city council listening. And so what I would say is is don't discount the influence that you can have individually on something like that, the positive outcome at a local municipal level, because I think that when it just takes energy to drive these things forward, and you're some of the people that have that energy, and I think if you have a receptive city council, it can happen. Jack, do you have anything to add?
That it was a group of high school students that went before the council and talked about the Natives Climate Protection Agreement that came out of Seattle.
You know, we can't hear you unless you go by to the microphone.
Oh.
I mean, the TV can't hear you. We're being videotaped. You can go sit by the microphone.
Yeah, here you go.
Yes, so in regards to Logan City and what was formed that Paul mentioned in his presentation, that came about from some high school students that went before the city council in the December 2005. I remember it vividly because I was with them. I was their teacher at the time. Anyway,
Instigator.
yes, exactly. So anyway, yeah, and the students gave a very, I guess you should say, impassioned and articulate presentation to the council. And that basically turned the council not only forming this new committee, but also going away from coal, because they had a vote coming up in regards to were they going to buy into more coal or were they going to go away to a cleaner energy direction. Well, by a vote of 3-2, because of these students, they decided to go away from coal and towards renewable, which meant forming this new committee, this Renewable Energy Committee, or Council, I should say, excuse me. So,
Great, thanks, Jack. So this is basically for any of you. Where would nuclear power fit into Pocatello's energy portfolio? And we touched on that a bit. Or would it? Would it need to, with hydro as a backup?
I have a thing I've been working through in this, and what does clean energy mean? This is what this triggers for me, because you can often clean energy is defined by a list of technologies afterwards. Clean energy, oh yeah, that's wind or solar, and that's people are like, yeah, wind or solar, okay, we're okay, we're on the same page. And then people say, oh, and hydro, and you're like, well, maybe. And nuclear, well, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure if we're on the same page here. And so I think that definition of clean that starts listing technologies quickly gets kind of unsatisfying and not quite right. And so I've been trying to think, well, maybe we should redefine that. That's one thing a community could do, is you'd start by saying, well, what do we mean by when we say clean energy? And I am thinking, and what I want to get people thinking about is thinking about that in terms of what are you trying to protect? What are the values you care about? So clean energy, that is clean energy protects air, protects water. It keeps local dollars in our community. That's kind of far afield from clean. But the point is to think about it and think about the technologies or whatever you're trying to do, this goal first, and what are the things that we're trying to protect. And then when you're presented with a project, whether it's a nuclear plant that is carbon-free but has some serious waste issues, or a solar plant that seems super clean but maybe is in a place with wildlife values. If you have a definition of clean that you've started and agreed as a community, this is what we mean, and it's based on your values, the things you care about, I think it makes that next conversation about specific projects easier. So that was my little soapbox thing about what does clean energy mean, and nuclear often brings that up. But that's.
I'll offer a comment because I don't know what it's like for Pocatello. I can tell you that Logan City is facing that issue right now because they're a member of this UAMPS. That's the Idaho Falls probably is also a member, and so there's this proposal for NuScale to do this nuclear plant. Well, you look at UAMPS. I remember from years ago when Logan City decided to participate in the coal-fired power plant at Delta, Utah. And now that's going to come, at some point that's going to end of life. And so you got to say, well, where does Logan City Power and Light go from there? And UAMPS go from there. And so they're looking at NuScale. Well, the economics of it is that I think NuScale is probably, I don't know, $60 a megawatt hour for what they can produce, or maybe it's even higher than that. And you look at some of the renewable energies sources that are coming available that are $25, $30 a megawatt hour. Nuclear doesn't even look economic. And on the other hand, it's a technology that ramps up and down very nicely, and could, from an environmental standpoint, be very complementary to enable more renewable energy use in a system where the grid, you have to match the supply and demand. So I don't know that you can factor it out, but I don't know what to say about it. I'm kind of glad I'm not on the city council having to do
That's right. I got involved in Idaho Power's long-term resource plan, and nuclear was kind of on the table as one of the options to be selected. And the final analysis is still coming out, but roughly it was 3 times more expensive than other things that would provide the same services. So that at least where it's at in the price point now. So
I just add a comment and maybe a question to Julie. From the city of Boise's perspective, our mayor and council defined clean energy, and it did not include nuclear. So that's something that's not on the table for us. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's where we landed. And that was also with community input. But I'm kind of curious, Julie, you go to international conferences, and I know France has a large nuclear power.
Paris is powered by nuclear.
Right. So
it's a massive city that's clean.
How are they
to be in
addressing this kind of is it really clean and renewable, or is it something that's not being discussed?
No, it's being discussed. Oh, you mean at an international level? Oh no, it's definitely on the table.
On the table to be continue or to take?
There are groups that want everyone to go all nuclear everywhere all the time. Yeah, and
France
then
is 70% right now.
What?
France is at 70%.
Yeah, but I mean.
Germany's 0.
Yeah, they're solar. Yeah, but every voice that you can think of is in that group looking for. Yeah, but I mean, it's so expensive. And it's actually shocking if you think about the cost, and you're in a meeting where they're talking about clean energy and someone says we should all be nuclear everywhere, right? So, I mean, if we can't afford solar panels, how can we start talking about nuclear reactors everywhere, right? So, anyway, it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Chris, just a further comment, because I think it may be as much a political science issue.
It's very much a political issue
as a technical issue, And it was interesting to me. I visited the French agency that deals with their nuclear waste is a valued customer of Campbell Scientific. They use our instruments for some of their geological qualification and monitoring that they do, and so on a visit over there a number of years ago, it was very interesting. The people that were hosting my visit informed me that the way they do that in France is politically, which is so different from Germany, is that they put their nuclear waste and responsibility for it under a different agency of their government from their nuclear fuels. And that the objective with the nuclear waste is for public visibility and accountability, while they can keep all their secrets secret under their fuels side of their nuclear agency. And I thought, well, that's a different way of doing it to try and overcome the political side of it. But to me, it was astounding that in Germany you had protests in the streets, and finally them saying, okay, we're going to pull the plug on our nuclear, at the same time that you have all of this public support and acceptance in France for their nuclear. A few years ago, I was influenced in the Obama administration by the statement by President Obama and prompted by his Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, I think it was, and who said, let's not take it off the table. We'll need all the levers available to deal with the climate change issue before we're done. And that's how I feel about it.
7 billion people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a controversial type of energy to talk about and think about, but Paris is a huge city, and they have clean air, and their water is clean. I mean, I was very impressed by that when I was there. There was no smog, and they are doing very innovative things in terms of controlling traffic and making the city walkable, and they're doing a lot of things. They're just really, I was impressed. They're not hesitating to move into a sustainable world. And they're doing the things that they think are right for their country, and Germany's doing the things that Germany thinks are right. And I think that's the thing about the plasticity of what does sustainability mean and how do you define it in your corner of the world, is that you can decide what that looks like for your group of people, for your culture.
The other thing I'll add is that France, they're reprocessing nuclear waste, meaning that you take the spent fuel rods and they reduce that mass down by 94% in reprocessing. That's at a further economic cost, but it's not something we're doing with nuclear energy in this country. And by the way, the United States produces more nuclear energy than France does. It's about 16% of our national energy use or generation compared to France's 70 to 80%. But France does have a better program and a stronger commitment to dealing with the waste.
Given the successes of various tax and tax credits as incentives for resources and energy efficiencies, and given unreliability of continued incentives via federal and state taxing authorities, are cities and/or counties exploring local taxing authority incentives, and are there any current examples?
Cities in Idaho, we don't have a local option taxing authority, and so we don't have on the transportation fund is a great example. We can't put that to a vote of the citizens to see if they'd want like a 0.5 cent sales tax raise to fund transportation. I think we're like one of two states, I think us and Mississippi maybe. So we don't have local option taxing authority, but we are looking at things like, an example would be, and this isn't necessarily on efficiency, but it is related to climate changes, incentivizing new homes to put in EV charging infrastructure. So just putting the conduit, if it's a couple $100, maybe we could provide an incentive to homeowners to do that, where we would reduce their fee for whatever permit they're applying for, the contractor. So those are the types of things we're thinking about on some of the kind of carbon reduction incentives. That would be just one example.
There's a interesting funding source out there. So cities or the utility pays a franchise fee to your city for the right to put their poles and wires and pipelines on your rights of way. And so that's collected through your power bills, and it's between 1% and 3%. And that money is collected from you all and goes into the city coffers, and they do whatever they want with it. So that's a thing. There's a funding source there. Like, you could ask, you could say, hey city, this money that we're collecting from the utilities, we want to reroute that into the energy consumption of our citizens and help them, become more efficient, to reduce the need for these wires in the first place. I think it's kind of elegant to use the money that you're already collecting from energy to help in energy efficiency. So that's something that's out there. Your city, I don't know what the level here is in Pocatello. I imagine it's something less than 1.5%, because if you want to go from 1.5% to 3%, you have to go to a vote of your citizens. And so I doubt that has happened. It might have. I apologize if it has. But that's an interesting fund. It's like a tax, but it's something you actually are allowed to do at a local level.
I'll just mention that when we built the solar array that you saw the picture of at Campbell Scientific, between Logan City, which the 13.4 kilowatts maximized the city's participation, but Logan City, state of Utah, and federal government, Campbell Scientific paid half, and the government sources paid half. That's about how it came out.
There's an amazing amount of programs out there too, grant programs like the USDA and Rural Development has some amazing stuff that's out there.
So I think we're about at time. There are a few other questions, but they're either about products, which I would encourage you to go check with your local water heater salesperson and find out what kind of water heaters exist and so forth and so on. Some of them really are more appropriate for city council, and we'll make sure those get passed on. I've been asked to note that the west side of the city hall parking lot is a Wisescape, a Xeriscape interpretive area where you can take your kids, take your grandkids, have a look yourself, see what that entails. And also I've been asked to note that the county landfill captures methane for energy, so good to be aware of. Don't forget this forum will be available on YouTube in a few days. You go to Pocatello Community Media, click on LWV, Our Energy Future, and the video of this will come up. And finally, I just want to thank all the groups that cooperated and collaborated, Yahoo, to make this possible. That includes, of course, the League of Women Voters and Portneuf Resource Council as our leaders, Snake River Alliance, Gateway Coalition for Change, Pocatello Citizens Climate Lobby, Idaho Conservation League, Portal Productions, the city of Pocatello, of course, made this facility available to us, and also Conservation Voters for Idaho, and most importantly, all of you. Thank you for being here and supporting this. Check out the tables if you like, and stay in touch. I doubt this will be the last time that you'll hear from us. Thank you very much. We appreciate you.